Well, good evening, everyone. And I've already asked everyone if you've got any questions, but in case you thought of one in the last few seconds, I'll ask again. Does anybody have any questions? All right, this is Monday, and we're technically in the last week of class, but we're going to extend this class one more week to catch up for when I unfortunately got COVID, and I apologize for that. But we're going to jump right in today. I'm going to share the book to you with you. And we're all the way to chapter 6, and we're going to go right through chapter 6 and 7 this week, and maybe even through 8, which is really the last basic chapter. In this chapter, it tells you you're going to learn all about, basically, this chapter is pretty much about practical amateur radio. The beginning of the book, they talk about good practices. When I started off as a ham, it was pretty well spelled out for all of us what the word good ham radio practices was. And it was actually spelled out and defined. I don't see that defined exactly like it was before, but there are certain I guess you could say defined descriptions in part 97 of what's expected of us in the rules and regulations. And the rules and regulations are most of the laws, they are legally binding like laws that apply to amateur radio. Part 97 of the FCC code is the part of the code that applies specifically to ham radio, licensed ham radio operators, and ham radio frequencies. It does not apply to any of the other services, but the whole body of the FCC code has rules and regulations that applies to everyone. So they're not the only rules, but they're the most of the rules that apply to us. Likewise, if I haven't told you guys before this, there's an organization, an international organization that is a chapter of the agency of the United Nations. It is the oldest international organization, and it is called the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU. It is now a branch of the United Nations, but the ITU predates the United Nations. It existed before that by treaty, and treaty under international law, once a nation signs to it, that nation and all of its citizens are subject to that or those agreements. They've agreed to make that part of their law. That is why Congress must ratify a treaty before it becomes signed by the U.S. President. President and his staff negotiate a treaty. They must take it to Congress. Congress must approve it by a majority vote, and then it becomes U.S. law. So those are the bodies that rule over us. Essentially, the ITU tells the world, here's what frequencies are going to be used for what. Here are the basic rules. And they're the people that actually set up amateur radio and where there might be and what kinds of broadcast and commercial radio there might be and where their services will eventually generally end up. Then, having generally defined all that, the local countries define specifically what parts of those bands that might be available to hams or for ham use are going to be issued to American hams to use, and or the word is allocated, and so on. So let's go through this. To begin with, I'm going to talk about band plans. There are basically two types of band plans. One type of band plan is the general band plan decided on by the ITU. That is international law. The United States is a charter member of that agreement going back to 1847. Going to have a hard time fighting that's a new law, or any of them are new agreements, I mean. And because of that, they are etched in hardcore cold stone. But then there are what they call voluntary ban plans. The FCC sets up some rules and regulations for their own as a ban plan. Those ban plans, and technically they're also voluntary ban plans. And I'm going to discuss that term voluntary ban plan real closely in a little bit. But they are pretty much their rules and regulations. You can't violate them. They define where we may operate within the ham bands in voice, where we may not use phone or voice. We can use digital or CW, even where we could have different types of signals like TV signals and so on. They are important to follow. Now, subsequently, there are also voluntary ban plans that we hams established. Things like where we're going to operate digital versus phone, where we assign repeater locations, and so on. Those voluntary ban plans, including the FCC's voluntary ban plans, well, that word voluntary is a little bit of legalese. For anybody that doesn't know this, the IRS under the legal code is a voluntary program. Just try not to pay your taxes. See how voluntary it gets. The government's meaning of voluntary is different than yours and mine. The government says, the FCC says, all the ban plans, whether they're created by the hams or not, once they're accepted and generally become set, then we must all obey them. But for the ones that we hams generate ourselves, the FCC says, here's the rule. If you choose not to follow the ban plans established by your fellow hams in your local area, well, they're not going to come knock on your door unless if there's a conflict. For example, you're operating a mode that everybody in your state has agreed, all the hams for generations has decided that mode is not going to be in this particular part of the spectrum. But the FCC doesn't have any rules against it, but that's been the long established ban plan for your area. Well, here's the problem. If you get in conflict with somebody else over it, say you want to operate a repeater on a frequency your repeater council is not approved. That's outside of the ban plan. It's the best example I can think of. You're legal to do it. It's fine as long as it doesn't interfere with anybody else. But if it interferes with anyone else, you must shut down and go to extreme moves to make sure, as a non-compliant operation, it does not interfere with stations that are compliant. So it's probably best to always follow the ban plans, whoever they come from. Okay. Now, so those are the ban plans that are established beyond the FCC. Okay. I'm going to run through these real quick questions here with real quick answers. So it says, where may single sideband be used in the amateur bands above 50 megahertz? Well, the first 1 kilohertz at the bottom of 50 megahertz is reserved for CW, and all the rest of it is phone. The next question, what is a band plan beyond the privileges established by the FCC? Well, I just referred to it as a voluntary band plan, but that's basically what they are. They're band plans created by amateur radio operators. And the question is going to end when we get to it. We're going to get through it tomorrow. It'll be in the question and answers tomorrow, I think, or maybe the last week. You'll see how it relates. What term describes an amateur radio station as transmitting and receiving on the same frequency? When you're transmitting and receiving on the same frequency, that is called simplex. When you're operating simplex, you're operating on a frequency. And when you stop talking, the other person keys up and talks on the same frequency. So for that reason, operating simplex, you really need to indicate when you're done and you turn it over to the other person. So we usually say things like back to you or over, and that keeps things pretty easily, working pretty easy. There is another form of communications in phone and in CW, or any other mode, and it's called duplex. In duplex operation, you walk on one, or you talk on one frequency, and the other person talks on another frequency. Cell phone works this way. That way, you both can be on the air talking to each other simultaneously. It takes a few tricks to pull that stunt off. You'll have to have separate, usually separate transmitting and receiving antennas, or a very complicated set of filters called duplexers. And in that case, you need full transmit duplexers. They're no simple task. They're used for things like repeaters, and repeaters are kind of a hybrid duplex. They are actually duplex communications. We listen on one frequency, we talk on another frequency. The frequency we transmit on is being listened to by a machine, a repeater, and it automatically will retransmit it on a separate frequency within the same band. And then we can communicate and extend our range, because the repeaters are usually placed on high and locations where the antennas can be up high and way more power than your handheld or even sometimes your mobile radio. So it provides a great deal of range that we wouldn't have, especially for, well, particularly for around town type mobile to mobile and handheld to handheld. By the way, so that you know, by FCC definition, if you're walking around with your handheld in your hand talking to somebody, that is not portable. That is mobile communications. Portable radio communications by the FCC, if it comes up on your test, portable means that you're operating a station significantly away from the location that is licensed as your station location. For example, I own property out in the state of Wyoming. My licensed station is here in the state of Michigan, where I am right now. If I go to my property in Wyoming, raise my antenna mast up, and power up my station, I am operating portable. Even though it's a fixed location, what is portable is the license. And as a ham radio operator, you're technically going to get two licenses. One is your personal operating license. That one tells you what your operating privileges are, like you're a technician or a general or an extra class, or even some of the older ones. But you will also be receiving a station license, and that is licensed to your location. You will have to provide the FCC with a fixed location that is where your station primarily will be. If you're going to operate somewhere temporarily away from that station significantly, usually thought of as being like a state away or further, then you are, and you're not just temporarily driving along or operating mobile, then that's a portable station. And in the old days we had to identify this. Now that's kind of obsolete. They don't make us identify that. We used to have to do special logging and inform certain we had to literally let the world know ahead of time we were going to do that. But the FCC got tired of the meaningless paperwork. I don't think anyone ever read it. I think they waited. And so that's how it ended up. So now let's go ahead. This is an example of the 2-meter band plan. This is a voluntary band plan, but it was a nationally accepted voluntary band plan by amateur radio operators. Goes way back in the earliest days when we started using 2 meters. Right about 1970, we started putting up 2-meter repeaters, and we started putting up satellites. And this is the band plan for 2 meters that was agreed upon back in those days. I can't give you the exact data. I should, but I just forgot, to be honest with you. I want to pretend like I wasn't alive in those days. I'm not that old. I was, though. So if you notice, from 144 to 144.05, that's for Earth, Moon, Earth, Morse code. The reason it's got CW and up there for that is because, well, I got to tell you something. Earth, Moon, Earth on phone gets pretty darn distorted. CW is easier to copy. So it's mostly done with CW, but we set aside a different set of frequencies for Earth, Moon, Earth, Moon, Earth, and that means bouncing the signal off the moon. Takes some really complex antennas and tracking systems and so on to do that. Anyways, but you notice right below that there's a segment for general CW and weak signals, then the phone portion and weak signal single sideband. Now, 144.2, it says, is a single sideband calling frequency. That's where you call CW or call on single sideband. And if you contact somebody, you move them to another frequency. And that would be somewhere in this section right below that, where it says general single sideband operation. If you look further down, I'm going to jump down the page, okay, and you get to 146.52. Way down at the bottom. By the way, in between, before I jump there, I'm sorry. In between, there's areas that are assigned as repeater input frequencies, and then there's an area assigned as repeater output frequencies, and so on. But down below this, at 146.2, this is the national 2-meter simplex calling frequency. If you don't want to talk on a repeater, you want to just talk to somebody direct locally, you're willing to, and you want to call CQ, that's where you would do it, regardless of the mode. Okay. Then down below that, you'll see is another little section of repeater outputs, repeater inputs. If you do the math, these are actually quite a few frequencies for each individual mode or segment of the bands, because the 2-meter band is in the 144 megahertz band, and it is from 144 to 148. Why, it's sufficiently large enough to accommodate a lot of different things. And so we take advantage of that. Now, there are band plans, just like channels, this one here on table 6.1, for every single band that's out there. Okay. And there are allocations for things like control links, which are in some bands. I didn't see it here, but it's here somewhere. Look that over. If you have any questions about it, I'll explain them when you, in fact, if you want to ask. But control links allow means of controlling radios or repeaters, so on. Generally, we do those up above 400 megahertz, usually in 440 or even higher bands. We also use some frequencies up there for signal links, so that we can via radio link one repeater to another. So if you read all that, you'll get a little more details, but you've got the heart of what you need to know there. Okay. Now, why are band plans needed? Well, I think I explained that. If I didn't do so, I'll do it real quickly. It's because there are too many knobheads in the world. If we didn't have a plan, too many guys would stand there and say, I don't care if it interferes with everyone else. I got the perfect right to be here. And there are still some people in the ham world that come along and they feel that way. Well, the FCC kind of defined, no, you don't. Follow the plan, get on board with everyone else, and you all got plenty of room to play. Lots of frequencies to work with. There's no reason to have problems. And generally, because of it, we all follow the band plan and we all don't have any conflicts or problems. So I guess the thing I'm saying is one of the reasons we need the band plans because it works. I'm going to jump ahead. I've already covered what band plans are. What I didn't tell you is that just about every region, every state has their own rules on how this is organized, but we all have frequency coordinators for repeaters. Repeaters are not arbitrarily assigned frequencies. That's a well-planned, coordinated effort. It involves usually committees who are frequency coordinators, and then one ultimate person oversees them. And every ham gets a chance to vote on the people in their area. Of course, you got to do a little digging because nobody comes out and tells you right off the bat, here's who everybody is for your state or for your area. After a while, you're on the air, you come to know how it all works and who's what. But everyone, once you become a ham, you got every bit as much of a right to vote every year when they come up. Tell you honestly, if you're all excited about that and think you might want to be one, it's got to be the most thankless job in the whole world. Uh, Nobody is ever happy when a repeater council decides upon what the whether or not a new repeater should be issued a pair of frequencies to use or denied, or whether because they're not being used, they should be moved to a new area. Somebody's always unhappy. And the unhappy ones are always the ones that treat everybody like poop. Making contacts. All right. First of all, a couple things I want you to keep in mind. Whatever mode you're operating in, always, let's go back a couple pages and look at the band plan. Let's say you're operating in the 2-meter band. Well, if you want to talk to somebody on the 2-meter general sideband region of the band plan, whether it's the band plan that we voluntarily created, or the band plan that the FCC gave us, or the overall band plan created by the ITU, which defines what bands may be issued to ham radio operators and which may not. We have to be careful that we don't operate out of band or out of plan. So, for example, as I said, again, it's not as serious here as it is at the official band ends, beginnings, according to the allocations. But let's say you're operating single sideband operation. Well, this single sideband operation, basically you have the band plan says we're allocating 200 to 144 megahertz, 144.75 megahertz. Well, if you're operating single sideband, you're going to be about 3 megahertz wide. So you don't want to operate any higher than 144.272. Because 272 plus 3 puts the edge of your signal right at the end of the band. Now, you also really don't want to operate on the frequency of 200, 144.2, because that's really the calling frequency. You go ahead and call right there on that frequency. That's okay, because that's what we set it up for. And yes, if you're interfering with somebody operating weak signal, you should work that out, but normally you never do. And they'll tell you if you do, and you just adjust up maybe 3 megahertz. I'm sorry. Yeah, 3 kilohertz. If you move up 300 kilohertz to 200.03 or 144.203, you call CW. Anybody's tuning around looking for somebody calling CW will find you. Technically, also, right at that point, you can stay there. But it's always a courtesy to move up a little bit so that anyone else wants call CQ, they can be down there in that region as well. Repeaters are assigned fixed frequencies. We do not want to operate simplex communications on repeater frequencies. If we do, we're going to interfere with the repeater, likely tie up the repeater's use, and it's going to get retransmitted on a frequency we're probably not listening to, so we won't hear the people who we're disturbing. So how do we do all this? How does it work where we don't interfere? And that's the big question. First off, it is appropriate, and it's always the best thing, to listen to a frequency before you use it for a period of time. My rule is 3 to 5 minutes. Then, before you say anything on the frequency, or at least before you call either CQ or call some other ham, ask a simple question: is this frequency in use? It's pretty obvious with repeaters because the repeater will have been quiet for those few minutes you were listening. And repeaters generally nowadays have what we call a squelch tail. It's an artificially made tone to basically allow us to hand over the communication to the next station. When the repeater stops receiving a signal, it's just before it stops transmitting, it will send that tone. And once it sends that tone, it resets its clock. Now, the repeater's clock is what sets the repeater ID time. So if you're operating on a repeater, you have a limited amount of time for each communique. So when you're usually most repeaters are set very short, like 3 minutes. So if you're long-winded, you're going to get in trouble. So what you do is you talk to somebody and turn it back over to the next station. You let the repeater drop out. You make it make its tone. The signal goes dead or quiet for a second, sometimes a fraction of a second, but in a lot of repeaters, it might be wise to delay before you pick up the mic to reply to somebody, to give a little time for some delays in things like digital communications or delays from links, one repeater linked to the other. The process of linking can sometimes introduce artificial delays. So you want to wait for an empty frequency. On simplex, you might want to ask first, is the frequency in use? If there's no reply, you go ahead and call CQ. If there is a reply and somebody says, yeah, we're using it, you might not hear the station that he's listening to. Say thank you and pick another frequency. The dial moves real easy. On repeaters, a repeater's not in use, pick up the mic. We usually don't call CQ on repeaters. It's pretty well accepted. You just say your call and something like you're listening, or just give your call. And if somebody's out to make a contact with you, they'll answer. If you want to call someone you know on a repeater, generally you just call them and their call. You say your call and then their call, or I'm sorry, their call and then your call, and you listen. If you're calling somebody, call 2 or 3 times at best. Wait and listen after each call. If you don't get them in 3 calls, they're not around, so don't keep trying. So, I pretty well covered it. Repeaters are generally, by the way, put up and established by clubs, and subsequently they get their funding from those clubs. Those clubs are made of hams just like you and me. So they have fees, dues. Annual dues are usually trivial, like $20 in some cases, as low as 20. Sometimes it's $100 for the whole year. You know what? It costs a lot of money to keep those things running. It takes a lot of time. It's well worth it. In a lot of cases, nowadays, in order to get repeaters up on towers way up high, like water towers and commercial broadcast towers, we get charged. We have to pay a rent. And rent costs money. So if you're a user of a repeater regularly, find out what the dues are, pay your dues, they'll be happy. And in most communities, if you're a member of one repeater, you support one, they consider that as good as supporting them all. So they just support one and everyone would be really pretty happy. That's a plug I'm giving for support your local repeater. Anyways, the system here says listen and aware that someone is using a repeater. Keep your transmission short. I pretty much covered why. Identify your station legally. You must identify, by the way, in every amateur radio communique, you must identify at the beginning of your communication. I'm sorry, at the end of your communications, and every 10 minutes in the middle. You don't have to identify at the very beginning, but it's wise that you do, because other hams are not supposed to talk to you if they don't know you're a ham. And the way they know is when you identify yourself with your call sign. Pause briefly between transmission to listen for another station trying to break in, and also in case there is a repeater link delay. Okay? When you're operating through a repeater, you are responsible for your own communique and anything done illegally by you. But in many ways, depending on what you do, so is the repeater trustee or owner. And remember that they're operating on their goodwill. If you violate rules, they may pretty much make sure you can't use their repeater. And if they say you're not welcome on their repeater, the FCC is going to back them up, especially if they're a coordinated repeater. All right. Now, all the United States is subdivided into location grids. It's like a grid map of the whole world, actually. And it's based on longitude and latitude. And each grid square has a number. For example, it says that the one for the ARL headquarters in Newington, Connecticut, the grid square is FN31. I happen to own a piece of property out there in Wyoming. The grid square out there across my property, the grid line runs right through the middle of my cabin, right through the middle of where my antenna is run. And all that was by coincidence. So when I transmit there, it's on two different grid squares. It's a rather unique and rare circumstance. There are people that collect making contact with as many grid squares as possible. When you get a chance, Google your location, find out what the grid square is where you live, and you'll get a grasp of how it works. It's a 4-digit number and letters. And I don't know if they have a picture. They don't. I know they don't have a picture of a grid square map. I'll try to find you one uh, uh, on the next break. Okay. Generally, ham radio operators try to inform each other how well we're communicating. We do that through a process. I'm going to quickly describe to you where I'm jumping ahead. We do that by giving what we call signal reports. In the old days, we used a 3-digit signal report. A signal report is given as tone, signal strength, and the third was can't remember. But anyways, we'll use 2 for voice. A signal report, you're going to give a signal like 1 through 5 to how uh, uh, clearly the communications is for you. And well, it's actually covered here. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. So if you got a really, really super strong signal, it'll be 5, 9. If it's a really strong Morse code signal, it'll be 599, because you have to have the quality. That's what the third thing is of the Morse code tone. So, and in your book, it describes giving signal reports. Try to be accurate. On 9, you're giving the report of how well you can copy the signal. If you're got a signal that's full quieting, and the signal is strong as can be, and you are 100% able to copy them, that's a 5-9 signal. If the signal is strong as can be, okay, but not full quieting, there's a lot of noise present, that's a 5-8, but you can still understand them okay. If it's getting a little scratchy, but with a little strain, 5-7. A little bit of flutter more, picket fencing, or you just dropping in and out, 5-6. If you're dropping out completely, where you're losing words, but you mostly can still understand them, well, that's dropping down to 5-4. Can't hardly hear them, but they're almost readable, but maybe not readable at times. Now you're down to a 5-3, 5-2. And if you got a signal, you can hear the signals there, but I can't make out any of it. That's a 5-1. Likewise, if you've got a signal that is strong, but not super strong, that might be a 4. If that signal is there, you got a good signal, but it's weak. But I still copy you. It's pretty good copy, but it's weak. That might be a 3-9. Okay. Now it's a lot subjective. It's our best way to give the guy an idea of how well he's doing. Likewise, if you hear noise on his signal, like a hum, inform him. It's a courtesy. If somebody tells you that, remember, they're not being mean. It's a courtesy. Sometimes even the hums and things like that, yes, they can be related to a problem in your station, but it could be some other condition causing it. Don't ever take signal reports personally, and always give them as accurately as you can. I already talked about the courtesy beep on repeaters. So we're pretty much through this portion. I'm going to go through one more, and then we'll take a break in a minute. I already covered the national calling frequency and all that. We'll get down to repeaters, how a repeater works and how we define them. Repeaters transmit on one frequency and receive on another. So if we receive on the frequency they transmit on, and we all transmit on the frequency that they receive on, we're all listening to the output of the repeater, and the repeater is all listening to our inputs to it. And we have great communications through it by doing that. We call this difference of frequencies between the input frequency and the output frequency the repeater split, because it isn't simplex. Remember, it's actually duplex. There's two frequencies. Duplex means dual or two. Then, for example, on 2 meters, the standard split is 600 megahertz. So we will, depending upon where the frequency's been assigned, in the 2-meter band, the band plan also defines whether the repeater will be a positive or negative split on every band. The 2 meters, for example, some of the repeaters are a positive split. And on a positive split frequency, that means that whatever the fundamental frequency that you tune to listen to the repeater when you transmit, it's going to be up 600 megahertz in frequency. If you have a repeater on a negative split, it's going to be down 600. This is the RST system, and I kind of said it to you backwards, and I apologize. So a little bit of residual from COVID, as I occasionally nowadays draw some mental blanks. I knew what I wanted to say, but I wasn't saying it quite the way I wanted to. So let's go through it officially. In the reporting system, it's called the RST reporting system because it has 3 elements: readability, strength, which is signal strength, and then for Morse code, tone. So readability, 1 is unreadable, 2 is barely readable, 3 is readable with considerable difficulty, 4 is readable with practically no difficulty, and 5 is so good you're like you're right in the same room as me type of readability. Now, for some of us old men, that might not be as reliable as it should be, but anyways, especially those with hard of hearing. The strength indication is 1 is a faint signal, barely there. 2 is just it's a weak signal. It's there, but it's weak, but very weak. 3 is, yeah, I got a real good hold on it, but it's weak. You can probably work with a weak signal. 4 is fair. 5 is a little better than fair. 6 is, it's good, but it's not terrific, but it's good. 7 is moderately strong. 8 is strong. And 9 is you're as strong as you'll ever get. You're blowing my socks off type strong. Well, let's be realistic, everybody. Nobody can discriminate all those values. We usually give a 1, a 5, or a 9. If they're just a little bit off of being a good, strong signal, that we would is pretty much we might give a 8 or a 7, but that's what we generally use. Okay. Now tone is a little different. If you ever learn Morse code, well, then you can read this chart on Wikipedia, because one is extremely rough and it's got a hissing tone to it. Two is very rough. Three is rough with a low pitch AC component, um, and slightly musical. In other words, it twerps. Morse code signal, because of the fluctuating voltage, goes ooh, instead of did I, kind of like as a musical tone. And then you can read through the rest of this. Finally, if you've got a good, strong tone, why then it's a 9. But remember, we don't actually send the tone. We're sending a signal that's just a wave, and the tone's being reproduced because of the signal. And that wave is, if that wave is distorted, that's how we get all these things. So that's what's really going on. All right, I'm going to stop that share. I'm going to start another share because I wanted to show you a grid line. They're the grid process. We go to my fancy favorite drawing program, and I copied in the national grid, radio grid system. And I didn't mean to highlight this one. I don't know how I did it. There we go. I did mean to highlight that one, and I'll explain in a minute. The whole world, every bit of the world is divided into grids like this, every inch of property. And if you look at the grid, there's a line right through here that denotes where the designation between where the DN, Dan, Nancy, or as the Southerners would say, darn Northerners, and the DM prefix. So everything above this line is a DN up to this line right here, and I don't know what it changes beyond that. I got to look at grid maps every time I want to look at one. But for example, my property in Wyoming is right on this line right here. So half of it's in DN 55 and half of it's in DN 64. Now over in Michigan, where I live, we would be zooming in here, and I happen to live in at the top part of EN 82. Kind of interesting fact, but I'm really close to 4 grid lines actually, but I'm not on any of them there. So you can imagine what a coincidence it is, by the way, to accidentally fall on grid lines. Somebody in this country sitting on 4 of them. It's I'm in more than one location, but it doesn't matter. Usually you go by where the antenna is set up.
Sir, I have a question.
Sure.
Is this something that's on the test?
It will ask you generally about grid lines. Yes. What
about grid lines?
Won't ask you with them specifically, like which grid line is here. Nobody remembers all that. You just have to be aware of the fact that there are grid lines and what they're for, and they're to exchange so that we can pass along a general location. Okay. Now, today, in the world of GPS, some modern radios, including a lot of digital radios, actually use the GPS system and actually send GPS coordinates. And you get a very specific location from them. Yaesu Fusion systems use this, and so does APRS, the APRS system, which is a digital system for communications that is dependent upon location. So I'm going to stop this share and we're going to go back to the book. So I want you to get familiar enough so that you just need a general familiarity to that. Okay. If somebody's calling CQ and you're listening to them, they will call CQ, CQ, CQ. This is, or they will say CQ, 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 DE, which is French for this is. And then their call sign. I would say CQ, 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 DENEGIR. I would probably say my call sign a couple times. I would say it once simply as NAGIR, one time phonetically. November 8, Golf India Romeo. Calling CQ and standing by. Then I'm going to be listening for somebody to reply. Whether it's in CW or whether it's in phone, it's all pretty much the same. If you wanted to reply, you would reply by giving your call sign and saying, well, you would give back first my call sign. You would say something like NAGIR. This is whatever your call sign you get issued, and that's all you really need to say. But it's nice if you elaborate and say back to you or over to you. Sometimes guys will throw in a pleasantry as pleasure to meet you. And that begins a QSO. QSOs from the Morse code Q codes. It's a slang word kind of in amateur radio. Don't have to know it, but it means a two-way communications on the air. So first thing you want to do is make sure wherever somebody's calling CQ, before you answer, make sure you have permission or privileges to operate there. I mean, when I say that, I don't mean somebody independently's permission, that the FCC has granted you permission. It's not out of yours area that you're allowed to operate. And answer them. He's looking to talk to somebody, and you're somebody. Every ham is equal, regardless of what some old cranky old, you'll run into some cranky old ham who's only wants to talk to certain people. Well, if he doesn't want to talk to you, move on. There's 6 million hams in the world. They all like to talk to you, except for that one cranky old guy. Don't worry about him. He probably lives in Michigan. Anyway, I'm not cranky like that. Okay. I mentioned that there is a Q table, and on table Q 6.2, I would tell you to, I think it's the next one, glance this over, get some familiarity with it. Some apply just to Morse code, okay? Some aren't used very often at all. I will give you the ones that are used the most. We often refer to QRM. That's not going to work. Go back. We often use the words or the Q codes QRM and QRN, but we only use them to. We generally don't do it as technically as here. We generally refer to the fact I've got QRM on my signal. That means I'm being interfered with by another station. QRN means I've got artificially created noise or natural occurring background noise that's interfering with the station. If somebody tells you the QRO, they want to know, can you bump your power up? Hey, can you QRO? And if you say I can QRO up, I got an amp here, I'll flip it on. That's great, but we don't usually. We usually just say, hey, can you, do you have any more juice you can turn on a little bit? Okay, if you're blaring through and you got too much power, I don't know when anybody anymore even says QRP, but we use the word QRP usually to describe a low-powered station. So sometimes net control operators on a net will say, I will take QRP stations first. He means so that low-powered stations don't get blocked out by higher power stations. Everybody else, but those operating in the 5 to 10 watt or lower range are who he wants to listen to first. We use QSL as an acknowledgement. You copy QSL. QSL, in other words, yes, I copied. QSL means I copy 100%. Somebody says QSL, you do not say Roger, but could you please repeat all after? Because you just told them, I got 100% copy on that, but I didn't hear it. Some of us that might apply. QSO is the ham radio communications, and we just use it as a reference most of the time. QST is reserved as a general message from the Amateur Radio Relay League to all of the members. It's the ARRL's unique form of CQ in a way. It's attention, everybody. We have a bulletin to transmit, is what it really is. QSY is one you should learn. QSY is to change frequency. So if you need to change frequency, we will sometimes say to a friend, can you QSY 2? And you give them a frequency. And you will acknowledge if you're going there. Yeah, I'll QSY to whatever the frequency is. And you just change frequencies and go there. Do we always use all these things? No. QTH is your location. That one we use. Hey, what's your QTH? We use it a lot. Do we use it a whole lot? No, they're not all that popular as they once were. They really applied to make Morse code shortcuts easier and to make Morse code conversations easier. So look them over, be vaguely familiar with the ones I just told you about. You probably won't get a lot of questions of anything on the test that's pertinent other than to just recognize the Q signals. They are the only, though, the only codes or encryption that you may use in Morse code because they are internationally defined and accepted. You may not use like 10-4, good buddy. The 10 codes are not internationally recognized and they are not standardized around the world. All right. Okay, I'm going way slow today, so I got to pick up the pace for the next 30 minutes. Since the beginning of radio, okay, DXing contesting. I'm going to cover this quickly. DXing is working stations at a considerable distance away, usually means another country, but normally it means another continent. So operating to Canada, some people do not consider DX. Operating to Mexico, people don't sometimes consider DX, depending on part of the country you're in. But operating South America, definitely. Operating Africa, operating Europe, operating Asia or Australia, that would definitely be DX. Contesting is quite common on the weekends, more common on the on the HF bands rather than VHF or UHF, but there are contests on both. And DX usually means, and contesting usually involves formally organized contacts to make as many contacts, efforts to make as many contacts during the period of the contest. You have to keep very good logs. You submit those logs to the organization that handles it, and they issue awards for people who make the most contacts. Likewise, many operators operate to get awards and things like DXCC, which is working 100 nations, worked all states, which means you've worked all 50 US states, WAS, and so on. European organizations have awards for working all of Europe, and there are just all sorts of things like that. Generally, those are done in the HF bands, but some of them are done on 10 meters in the band spectrum that you will have access to. Some of them are done on 50 megahertz, the 6-meter band. You will have technicians have access to. And there is long-range communications done on on VHF and UHF, sometimes directly with enormous antennas. There, we usually consider like uh, DX would be to Canada or to Mexico. That's the exception. But you can work the world through satellites. And uh, we also have now digital repeaters that are linked around the world. They all count. They different for different awards, but they all account for chasing DX as we refer to it. All right, I'm going to cover something. The old standard television was something called National TV Standards, and the C stands for corporation. It is defined as a mode, NTSC. We use the same mode for a lot of amateur radio, for television. A lot of hams don't work TV. But two-way TV does exist, two-way video. Today, digital is rapidly replacing it, but it's still part of the ham world. Okay? Now, before break, I want to cover this real quick. Every single year, every amateur radio operator around the country in the US can join in something called the ARRL Field Day. Generally speaking, you can operate this from home, but it's designed for groups of hams to get together and at a remote location, they would operate as if it was a national emergency. And they run a contest for 24 hours. They generally go out somewhere, they set up portable stations, they put up portable antennas, they provide portable emergency backup power, a power to run that station, not off the grid stations. And they set about trying to make as many contacts as possible. Wonderful thing about Field Day is at the club locations where they're at, they generally have a station called a go-to station. The go-to station allows you to operate with one of their hams, usually an extra class. As the control operator, he will let you sit down at the station and go to work, working coast to coast, and talk to as many stations as you can, as long as you want during that 24-hour day. Bring lots of coffee. It's always the fourth full weekend of June. And nowadays we have one in the fourth full weekend of January called Winter Field Day. It will be coming up. So generally speaking, hams pick indoor locations for the transmitters for Winter Field Day in much of the country. It is not yet as popular as the June Field Day, but it is growing. All right. I hate the fact this book jumps around, so I'm going to jump what makes more sense. And I want to cover repeaters all at once. We cover what a repeater is, how it works. One of the ways you can find a repeater, of course, is many radios have a scanning function. You can scan to find the frequency, hear where it's at. But the best way to find a repeater to work on is, or to operate through, is to use what's called the repeater guide. It's published. It's on the internet in several locations. You can just search for repeater guide. It's there, but you can actually buy it as a book. And it lists in the book every repeater in the United States. So you pick your hometown, and there will be a list of the repeaters. Some repeaters are FM repeaters, like all of these. This happens to be the west side of Michigan, it looks like. Yep, because this is the repeaters. This is includes the east side of Michigan. So this is it's alphabetical. And right here, these repeaters here are repeaters I work through routinely. It will list what frequencies they're on. It will list whether it's a positive or a negative split. And it will list whether or not, or what, whether it's analog, FM, or what digital mode is used. Okay. Now, this fusion repeater right here, I'm very familiar with because I helped maintain that repeater along with about 30 others. And it's digitally linked to a bunch of all 30 repeaters. We have them linked up through the internet so that you can operate any one of those repeaters and talk to anyone who's listening on any of those repeaters that are linked from all the way down to Sandusky, Ohio, to Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, at the top of the Upper Peninsula. We have the whole east side of the state of Michigan linked. We have it as wide as from Detroit to Ann Arbor and Lansing, about halfway across the state, all the way up. We don't have every area of every bit of the state covered yet, but that's our goal. So on a repeater, if you go to a repeater directory and you pull up a town, a city, you can look up what repeaters are there. Pretty handy also if you're traveling and you can find out what's going to be there in the meantime. Now, the book covers for you what to do about jamming and interference and how to find it. Well, it gives a good description. You can take a small beam antenna to try to find a signal, find out where it's coming from. There are even more complex and advanced methods. There are ham radios that operators in clubs that they practice what they call foxtrot hunting. I'm sorry, fox hunting. A fox hunting exercise, a small transmitter will be hidden somewhere, like it's basically a beacon. And the goal is to be the first one in the group to find where the people that hit it. And it's a training method to learn to find hidden signals. Now, at the same time, if you're looking for interference, one good tool to use is a cheap transistor radio, old transistor radio, because you can find like noise, background noise, because they're so poorly made, their receivers are so insensitive that as you get close to a noise, they get louder. As you get away from it, they get softer. And sometimes if you want to find an isolated signal, say within a house that's interfering from some non-intentional source, that's where you could find it. Now, I told you earlier that we use television, NTS, and NTS is full live moving TV. It's usually found above 430 megahertz because of the bandwidth it occupies. But we also have slow scan TV. Slow scan sends one image at a time. It's not live motion. And you can experiment and play with it. It's great, it's fun. Some of the uses of slow scan include satellites. For slow scan is sometimes used by satellites to send down to Earth the images of the Earth overhead. They build slowly on the screen, and the satellite sends down the signal. These are not ham satellites, they're weather satellites. And we can receive those. You really don't even need a license to receive those, but some hams like to. But you can also, on the ham frequencies, transmit and receive slow scan TV. Okay. Talked about shift. I covered all this. Talked about linked repeaters. Last thing about repeaters that I don't want to forget is tones. In the US, we use a form of sub-audio tones called the continuous tone code squelch system. We use that to squelch the receiver of either the radio or the repeater or both. It's original purpose was to allow multiple users to use the same frequency in commercial radio as other commercial services so that one would not hear the other. We use them so that one repeater will not interfere with another repeater. It won't accidentally bring up or cause another repeater in a different area to come to life. The Motorola company referred to them as private line tones. They are a sub-audio tone, and you can't hear them. But if a repeater has a CSS tones set, which is a type of squelch, then that repeater will not unsquelch unless you have the same tone set. Every area, the repeater council has decided on what would be the standard tone for every band in that area. Most repeaters use that recommendation, although there are some oddball to everybody and everything. But back in that repeater directory page, right here, is defined what the tones will be. And you just have to set that tone on your radio. Your radio does have to have the ability to generate that tone. So some older radios do not. They need an additional circuit board that you have to add in. Newer radios all have CT, CSS tones built in. And you have to set it properly in order to operate through the repeater. It's pretty much in your area, set it and forget it. Once you set it up, unless you change areas or unless you have an oddball repeater in the area. And various radios have different ways in which you can save in memories, the location, in a memory location, the frequency, the offset, and the tone for the CT CSS tone or PL tone, as the Motorola slang. And if you save it, then you never have to reset it when you're operating that particular memory location. So it's not as difficult as it may sound. I talked about, oh, one last thing. Europe and some of the other parts of the world, they use tones that are two-tone bursts when a person starts to transmit and when a person drops to transmit. Unlike the PL tones, which are from 38 hertz to 300 hertz, well below what the human ear can hear, PL or CT CSS tones. The two-tone bursts are audio blurps. They're a two-tone, and once they're used to bring up the repeater, some people can actually use their voice to mimic the tones and make it happen. But I'm not one of them. And my imitation was as best as I could do. Okay. Now, we have analog and we have digital repeaters. I think I've covered that they're analog and digital frequencies and analog and digital repeaters. There's a description here on some of the repeaters and their use. Talked about this before in the question and answers. Some digital modes like DMR have what are called talk groups, where you can assign a number and limit who's going to be accessible. They have to be members of the same talk group if you're utilizing the talk group. Some members or some methods of digital or some digital modes require what are called plugins. They're specifically set of programmable information data you have to set up to define for that particular group, usually for their repeater. And I kind of described to you vaguely that there is internet linking of repeaters. It's defined as internet radio linking. We also use voice over internet protocol for digital modes. That allows us to do that digital linking. Voice over internet is the same protocol, digital protocol, that is used on the internet to make well, like you able to use your uh tablet or computer to FaceTime somebody, or to it's the audio portion is handled by voice over internet protocol. Uh, One thing I do want to bring up is Echolink. Some repeaters are linked to Echolink. Echolink is an internet service. Once you're licensed, you will need a ham radio license call. Once you're licensed, you can submit your call to them. They will check out to make sure you're legit, and they will give you permission to access as a ham. When you do that, there are repeaters and transceivers around the world that are linked to Echolink that you can go on and remotely operate. You can talk to guys, like say in Hong Kong, on a repeater in Hong Kong. But keep in mind, if the radio linked on the Echolink is an HF transceiver that is down in bands that you don't have permission to operate in, you may not use that particular radio. You still are a control operator of any radio you operate through. So you cannot operate outside of the privileges of a technician until you upgrade to general. All right, we're at 924. DMR. You read that, you'll get a grasp of what it's offering. Okay. Last thing I want to cover is that there is such a thing as hotspots. They're kind of cool. There are these little boxes that you can buy that kind of look like that. They hook to a computer, and they have a little microcontroller inside and a little radio board. They're low powered radios, and they can receive and transmit. You can program them for whatever receiver, whatever frequency you want. They work a form of simplex, although some do work duplex. And you set them up to the across the internet. They tie to a local repeater. Your book describes how that's done. The details aren't all that important, but it works really good. So, for example, if there's a repeater way out of range for you, you can walk around your house on the handheld and talk through your hotspot and operate through that repeater. I have operated repeaters on the opposite side of the world using hotspots, and it can be done. Just like Echolink, except I don't have to be tied to a computer when I use it. Echolink, by the way, you operate from a computer or maybe a cell phone or tablet, any internet source.